Hello everyone and welcome to the Culture Cast. I'm Chris Stashu and I am joined by my good friend, the host of the Projection Booth podcast. He's the world-renowned podcaster extraordinaire, Mr. Mike White.
Konnichiwa.
Oh my god, konnichiwa indeed. And on this Culture Cast, we are kicking off Samurai September, a theme that Mike, you suggested, with a look at the samurai black comedy Kiru, otherwise known in English, Kill! Exclamation point.
Can I clarify that I chose the month, but I did not choose the movies?
That's correct. You chose the month, not the movies. Mr. Mike Wallace chose the movies because Mike White, you chose the movies last month. So figure kind of a little bit of alternation. Though, again, when we talk about this movie, we'll get to my kind of issues with this movie, and they're not of the movie's fault. So, the film is directed by Kihachi Akamoto. It is written as well by Kihachi Akamoto and Akira Murao. It stars Tetsuya Nakadai, Etsushi Takahashi, and Yoriko Hoshi. And the film follows two ronin, one an ex-farmer, one an ex-samurai, who get caught up in, I would say, spaghetti western-esque kind of power play between a group of samurai and their former clanlord. All right, Mike, so I'd never seen this film before. Had you seen this film before?
I had not seen this film before. This had been on my to-watch list for a long time, so you gave me a list of a few movies. I had seen maybe one of them, and so I said, well, maybe I shouldn't do that. Maybe I should see the movies that I haven't seen before, so chose this one, and I'm glad I did. I enjoyed it. You actually talking about the plot, even just that very brief synopsis, there were things that I wasn't 100% sure what was going on, and I've watched this movie twice now. There weren't a lot of notes for it that I was finding, and plus it's tough when you have a movie just called Kill. Yeah, it's so tough to find, like to Google that kind of stuff. So even though I was looking for Kiru 1968, it was still difficult. Even last night I was like, are we watching the 1968 version or are we watching 1962's Kiru, which is also known as Sword of Destiny? So I'm glad that you set me straight. I'm glad we both watched the same movie because that would have been really embarrassing.
Yeah, no, this movie is really hard to follow, almost kind of infuriatingly so, but I kind of buried the lead with something that bothered me from the outset from this movie, and this is partially, I would say mostly my fault. I had never really seen very many samurai films, so this film is very much like a comedic exploration, almost verging on parody of samurai films in the samurai genre, and not having been very familiar with the samurai genre, a lot of the kind of aping and kind of genre comedy that they employ went right over my head because I don't have a whole lot of experience with the genre. It's like, this is going to be a really kind of lowbrow comparison, but it's like watching Scary Movie and having never seen Scream. But it's very similar. I mean, you know, you'll find it funny, but you're not going to fully appreciate what they're kind of going for, if that makes sense.
No, it makes total sense, especially because as I'm watching Kiru, I'm seeing what I think are nods to other movies. So, and you're probably not necessarily picking up on that, but I'm like, well, I think that this is supposed to be an homage to this movie, and I think this is supposed to be an homage to that. There's even like a line right towards the beginning where they're like, we had some trouble here 2 years ago. And I was like, well, I wonder if that's referencing this movie that came out in 1966. And so, yeah, I wasn't picking up everything either. So I can't even begin to imagine where you were with this. And as far as this being like a genre, like, so samurai films are a genre in as much as spaghetti westerns are a genre. Right. And you can have spaghetti westerns tell so many stories. You can look at like a comedy like Trinity, or you can look at something that's kind of more of a darker comedy, which really isn't supposed to be that funny, but like Django, or, you know, something outrageous like a Sabata or something. So there's so many different ways that you can bounce against those conventions, and this is the same thing where there's ways you can bounce against the samurai conventions. And that's why things like Yojimbo and Fistful of Dollars play so well, that they can both be in similar universes, even though one's in Japan and one's ostensibly in the United States.
Yeah, and that's, again, the thing is, like you said, I mean, this, the samurai genre, it's more of a subgenre of film, right? I mean, I think we can both agree on that. It's a subgenre. It's not its own kind of standalone thing because it marries certain parts of other genres, drama, action. And so, again, it's just I have no problem admitting I've never even seen Seven Samurai.
Mm-hmm.
I've never seen Yojimbo either. I mean, I've seen A Fistful of Dollars, which, like you said, is essentially the same movie, just the Western version.
Right.
But I've never seen the source material, and when I came to a film like Kiru, all I could think is man, it's just completely going over my head. I mean, there are some good performances. Atsushi Takahashi is quite good. I think he carries the film along with Tatsuya Nakadai quite well. I think they play off of one another pretty well. I think they're both pretty funny, especially Atsushi, who is playing this ex-farmer kind of lughead, and Tatsuya plays the kind of, I think the Genta character, it's supposed to be making fun of Yojimbo, right? That's kind of what it's going for?
Well, yeah, Yojimbo that's already a comedy, so I don't know if it's necessarily making fun of Yojimbo, but it's definitely making fun of the idea of the samurai and him wanting now to be a Yakuza because samurai life wasn't for him it's an interesting term. Like, one of them wants to be a samurai desperately and was the former farmer. The other one desperately doesn't want to be a samurai because he's experienced it before. And now he wants to be a Yakuza because I guess basically they'll get a free meal and a night's rest out of it. So, yeah, it was interesting to have that dichotomy of these two characters, but they both start in literally the same place, the same city, the same empty belly, the same line of, like, don't yell at me, it jostles my stomach, both of them going after this chicken that's in the city. So they start on the same place, and the way that their stories diverge and then reconverge as we go along is kind of a nice storytelling way of doing it, and that we care for both of these protagonists almost equally, and they both have their own weight to them as far as their backstories. Like, we don't know that the one guy was a farmer until about midway through. We don't necessarily know that the other guy was a samurai until around the same time, and they both have their reasons for obfuscating their past.
Well, and the other thing about these two characters is it honestly feels like they both walked out of different movies and just happened to meet. Right? I mean, you have the character of the ex-farmer who wants to be a samurai, which he could be the star of his own movie. And then you have the character who is the ex-samurai who is now a Yakuza member, who's also just kind of like a wandering vagrant, and he could be the star of his own movie. And they both meet in this movie, and I think that that's one of the kind of more clever things that Murao and Akamoto do with the script, is that they play off of what I'm assuming again to be conventions of the genre, and essentially mashing these two characters up against one another. It'd be like having The Man with No Name and Django in the same movie.
I guess to your point, it's almost like having Toshiro Mifune from Seven Samurai and Toshiro Mifune from Yojimbo meeting in the same film. Because in Seven Samurai, he's a farmer who doesn't want to be a farmer and kind of pretends to be a samurai, and he's the crazy one. And that's why he desperately hates the farmers who are weak and who are asking the Seven Samurai for help. And also, I'm pretty sure that with this group of seven in the film, like my wife yesterday, who hasn't seen Seven Samurai maybe ever, was like, oh, you know, are you going to watch Seven Samurai again? I was like, I haven't seen that in years. Oh, well, you just watched it Sunday. I was like, no. She's like, well, they kept talking about the Seven Samurai. And I was like, okay, yeah, now I know where you're coming from. But no, those are seven different samurai. This was a totally different thing, even though they have the whole idea of these seven samurai and then basically the whole thing hinges upon the people, the common man, kind of coming out and them being the saviors, which is somewhat similar. I mean, it's been a long time since I've seen Seven Samurai, but there's some similar themes there.
So, like you're saying, I mean, this almost feels like the best hits of the samurai genre.
Yeah.
You have seven, like you said, seven samurai. I didn't even pick up on that until you said it. You have seven samurai in this movie, but they're not those seven samurai. They're another different set. But it's not a coincidence that there are seven of them. It's not.
No. And even those guys, they kind of reminded me of like the 9 younger samurai from Senjuro that Yojimbo is trying to basically take under his wing or like keep them from being killed. And there's this whole, again, the code of the samurai, and they're very into the code, and Yojimbo's just like doesn't give a shit kind of thing, which is very similar to like Genta in this movie, when the guy comes up and he introduces himself and Genta just doesn't even know what to do. And because we have this one dude who's just all about the introduction, all about the formality, and Genta like is mocking him at one point and then kind of does the same thing later on to another guy. And so there's some comedy being played out as far as let's take these roles and let's destroy them. Like when we finally get the Chamberlain and we realize, who this guy is and stuff, he's all about like, oh, a brothel. I've never been to a brothel before. Let's go there. And then he never wants to leave. So yeah, we're taking these characters who are supposed to be staid and very formal and just tipping them on their heads.
Which works in this film and works in this film's favor. And I think that's what makes this film interesting and fun. Again, it is hard to follow. We've already kind of touched on that a little bit. And I mean, it wasn't for the lack of quality of the film. I watched this on what's quickly becoming my new favorite, Jesus Christ. My new favorite streaming platform, which if you've never checked it out, you totally should. Filmstruck. They have, I think, most of, if not all of the Criterion films on there. And great transfer of the film, on point with the subtitles, because with a film like this, first off, I'm not sure that there even is an English dubbed version, but you've heard us talk about this before. I'll take another opportunity to talk about it again. I think you and I are in the same camp, Mike. Do not watch foreign language films in English dub. It's a recipe for disaster. I know some people don't like to read when they go to the movies. It means you have to pay attention. But if you watch a foreign language film dubbed in English, you're missing out on the way that the actors are acting.
Exactly. And these guys are great actors. And these actors, I mean, especially Tetsuya Nakadai, he is amazing. He was in Yojimbo and Senjuro, and there are times where I forget that he is the same dude from those movies just because the way he holds his face, the way he acts is so different. And this guy's been around. He's still working, and he has just been in some classic films. It's just his filmography is freaking amazing. And even looking at what he's done, what he did in the 90s, what he did in the 80s, he was in Ron. He worked with Akira Kurosawa for almost his entire career. So he's just an amazing guy. And I highly recommend. I wouldn't have necessarily picked this as your entree into the world of the samurai. I would have picked something more standard first and then had this be kind of like after you've seen what the conventions are, now let's see it lampooned. Yeah,
well, and that's the thing. Again, I mean, no fault of anyone other than myself. I should have really researched ahead of time, but I just assumed, and you know what they say about assuming, that this was an okay choice for the first film. And honestly, I mean, this is the equivalent of being tackled into the deep end of a pool. You're not given a life preserver. You're essentially thrown into the deep end of the pool and told, hey, float. Because, again, I missed out on probably more than 50% of what makes this film a true parody and kind of send-up of samurai films. And it'll
Right.
take me watching it again after I've seen some samurai films to really catch everything. I mean, again, a lot of the character conventions and the tropes, those are easy to spot just with a baseline knowledge of Seven Samurai, Yojimbo, films like that. I mean, that's a baseline knowledge of those. You can apply that to this, but having more of a in-depth knowledge of samurai films probably would have helped with this film. Not probably, it totally would have helped with this film.
Yeah, and even though, like Seven Samurai is kind of like the default to go to, it's a good starting place for a lot of folks. And Seven Samurai was 1954 and this movie's 1968. So we're already so far past where Seven Samurai was, but Seven Samurai was very revolutionary, and especially the way that Kurosawa already is playing with form in that. I mean, that's not Kurosawa's first movie. He had been making movies for a long time before that, but that really helped put him on the map as far as like redefining and creating the samurai genre. And then even like when we get to Harakiri in a couple weeks here, I mean, that's 1962. So you're already so many years far removed from Seven Samurai, but I think starting almost more in chronological order would have done you a little bit better this month. But again, nobody's fault. And then when you see Harakiri, you'll be like, yeah, this is probably more of the serious samurai film.
Well, and that's what I was expecting, was a very serious, straightforward, stone-faced take on samurai, and then you've got this film where it's not stone-faced, it's horse-faced, because one of the actors, he's got a little bit of a, elongated, why the long face horse thing going on, and it's just a very comedic film. It's just very funny, but it's not like laugh out loud humor. It's more of like, I don't know.
That's funny because you actually just used a joke that was in Sanjuro, because there's a guy in there who's also in a lot of other Kurosawa films, and he makes his face very long, and at one point he's just like telling the story about people making fun of him and saying who has a longer face, he or his horse. Are you talking about, though, I'm curious if you're talking about Shin Kishida?
No, I'm talking about Etsushi Takahashi, the ex-farmer.
Oh, okay.
That's who I'm talking about.
All right, because Shin Kishida, he has an amazing face. I love his face. He's the guy that plays Jirota, the guy whose fiancée, she needs 30 ryu for him. He needs 30 ryu to buy her out of being a prostitute. His face is so great. And that guy, I feel really terrible for that guy. He only lived to be like 40. I think he was like 20-something when he was in this role. He doesn't look like he's 20 because he's got like this almost weathered face at this point. And then he ended up playing Dracula in these Toho Dracula films. So he really used that unique look to good means in that.
Very high cheekbones.
Oh, yeah. And that, like, kind of, not necessarily a wide nose, but like a longer nose. Looks really interesting.
Yeah. No, again, that's the other thing about this film that is great, is that it has a lot of emoting through the characters' faces and their eyes. And I think that that's another reason that this film is kind of like a parody or a kind of a send-up, is they're all like completely over the top, which from what I can tell with the samurai genre, that's not normally the way samurai characters are portrayed. Kind of very, these characters in this film are very expressive and over the top.
Yeah, I mean, you do see that in some of these films, especially the female characters. Like if you go and watch Throne of Blood, the woman that plays Lady Macbeth, she'll do these crazy laughs, but they're almost all like stage laughs, because she'll laugh and she'll get quiet almost like that. But yeah, the whole, especially the scene in the brothel when everyone is singing and going crazy and the woman's slapping the guy and he keeps like trailing his fingers up her neck and then she'll slap him again. That whole scene is just balls out nuts as far as like super expressive, and we are just, having a great time. But again, I think that's trying to show like the salt of the earth versus the more upper crust. But yeah, as far as our main characters, they're just wild. To watch these guys and those looks on their faces is fantastic.
And how they're fighting over a chicken. This whole
Yes.
movie is because of a chicken. Because they're hungry.
Yeah, because the samurai life can do a lot for people, but it really can't fill their bellies.
That's true. Apparently that seems to be the case. So, well, let's take a quick break. We'll play some ads, and when we get back, we'll finish up talking about the film.
Have a hunger for horror? A yen for Yelp yarns? Then give your blood-curdled bones a boon and tune in to Chronicles from the Crypt. Join sordid slime slingers Casualty Chris and Father Malone as they take on HBO's groundbreaking television series Tales from the Crypt. Here's what the rotting and rancid rabble are saying about Chronicles from the Crypt. Tune in to Chronicles from the Crypt. You have nothing to lose except your life.
Who is Carl Kolchak?
He's a reporter.
Now that is news, Vincenzo. News! And we are a newspaper. We are supposed to print news, not suppress it.
With the INS.
What's an INS?
Independent News Service, sir, founded in 1904 by Enrico Paluzzi.
Who seems to have a nose for the strange and unusual.
Well, last year in Las Vegas, I uncovered a series of murders that turned out to have been committed by a vampire.
And what is the Kolchak tapes?
It's a podcast.
All about Carl Kolchak,
What's a Kolchak?
the Night Stalker.
And where can you get it?
On iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and at www.kolchaktapes.com.
As foolish a game as any that Gory the Ghoul could make up.
Here's what some people are saying about the Projection Booth podcast.
Week after week, I'm mesmerized by the focus given great films and questionable films alike. But every episode is a learning and entertaining experience.
This is hands down the best movie podcast. They cover so many different genres across so many years, from obscure movies to blockbusters.
If there's only one podcast about movies and cinema that you listen to, make it this one.
The Projection Booth podcast, with new episodes available every week at projectionboothpodcast.com.
In 1985, a curious phenomenon occurred. The Twilight Zone returned to television, featuring all new tales of mystery and imagination from the minds of Ray Bradbury, Harlan Ellison, George R.R. Martin, and Stephen King. Dreams for Sale, the Twilight Zone 85 podcast looks back at that land of shadow and substance and re-examines the groundbreaking successor to Rod Serling's legacy. Featuring new interviews with the show's creators and cast, Dreams for Sale can be found on iTunes and at twilightzone85.com. Dreams for Sale. We'll be waiting for you in the Twilight Zone.
All right, we are back and we are finishing up talking about Kiru. So I'm curious, Mike, because you have seen samurai films. Outside of, watching this twice now, would you consider this to be a good kind of example of samurai films, or is it kind of like a weird standalone thing that kind of does some interesting stuff but isn't necessarily a straightforward samurai film?
No, I mean, well, it's not straightforward. I mean, we've talked about that. It's not a staid samurai film. I mean, you're going to watch Lone Wolf and Cub next week. And Lone Wolf and Cub is, I mean, the characters in that are very stone-faced, especially Ogami Ito is very, very stone-faced throughout the entire film. So he's not showing those emotions that we're seeing from the characters in this movie. But then you get to the violence, and the violence is absolutely fucking crazy when it comes to that. The violence in this one, not so much. I mean, we see some arms coming off, a finger coming off, those kind of things, but we've already gotten that. Again, I think that was kind of a reference to Yojimbo as far as the arm coming off. But, I mean, again, like, samurai films can be so different that you can have funny samurai films, you can have adventure samurai films, you can have freaking pirate samurai films, you can do all of these different things with the samurai genre that I don't think there's necessarily a typical samurai film. So this one is more in the comedic vein, I suppose. And to that end, I think that this does a really good job with that. I didn't groan while I was watching this. And luckily, I don't know if you're familiar with Italian comedies, and I would not recommend doing an Italian comedy month. Like, those movies always make me groan because they're just so silly. I have yet to, knock on wood, see a very silly samurai film.
Well, I grew up in an Italian household, so my life is an Italian comedy, so I don't necessarily need to go watch one.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, because we've talked about the plot of this film a little bit, right? We've talked about how it's confusing, and you mentioned that. It's not straightforward, right? Do you think, not even think, it has to have been an intentional send-up of samurai films, right?
Well, yeah, there's the whole idea of, and this isn't just samurai, this is a genre unto itself, like a castle intrigue film, where you get the whole idea of who's backstabbing who and who's doing this against that. And with this having the two protagonists, you're getting a lot of that stuff as far as this camp wants to do this and that camp wants to do that, and who's going to get set up to do this, that, or the other thing. So those moments where, like, you've got the Shin Kishida character, and where you're just like, okay, well, what exactly is his motivation other than his wife, and who is he working for? Is he working for the Seven, or is he working for this other group? And those things were what was confusing. On a second viewing, I got a little bit more, but I think that I need to get even more than that as far as who's working for who. But yeah, it was a little confusing for me. At the end of the day, I was mostly just paying attention to our two main characters. Things finally started to fall into place maybe the last third of the film, where I was like, oh, okay, now I know what the motivation is. Like, once our hero gets the shit kicked out of him, which is typical to almost every samurai film, spaghetti western that you can think of, I was like, now we're falling more into a pattern. Now I can start to understand who's the bad guy, who's the good guy, and the Seven end up just being superfluous to the story.
Yeah, that's what I noticed, is it really did take a while to get to a point where I was like, I get what's going on now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it honestly, it just kind of takes a while to get to the actual movie, if that makes sense, to what seems to be the conflict.
Right.
Which I feel like will make some people kind of check out early on, because they're like, this movie seems to be spinning its wheels from the get-go, and I have no interest, and it's kind of hard to get someone's interest back once you've already lost it. And that was a little bit of what I experienced at the beginning of the movie, because I was like, man, what the hell is going on? When are we going to get to the actual, like, meat of this film?
They don't do us any favors by... So, like, we get the introduction of the two main characters, and they're talking, and then we get a third character coming around, and he's got lunch, and they steal his lunch, etc. Okay, that's great. I'm with the movie up to that point. We're, 5 minutes in? And then all of a sudden, like, all these other dudes show up, and then they start spitting names at us. And I'm just like, am I supposed to remember all of these names? There are a lot of names all of a sudden that I'm supposed to remember. And then it's like, well, we're going to tie you up and we're going to make it look like this. And that's, as soon as they start doing that, I'm just like, oh shit, now I got to remember what the plan is and who's getting double crossed. So yeah, it took me a while to actually start to reinvest into that, because as soon as they introduce all those names and start doing double crosses within the first 10 minutes of the movie, I was like, this is a little complicated for me.
And it's unfortunate because, it does start so strong with that initial scene where they're fighting over the chicken. And I really liked that scene. I thought that scene was a great setup with Genta and Hanji fighting over this chicken. But then it just, like you said, it just it starts getting muddled in all these characters. And it took a while. It took probably a good 20 minutes for me to kind of catch back up with the movie. And I think it also doesn't do itself any favors by kind of switching around to these other storylines that don't really pay off until way later in the film.
Yeah, and there are too many people that are just talked about, and we don't necessarily know who they are. It's not like, this is the Chamberlain, this is this guy. So, yeah, it takes a while for the dust to even settle when it comes to that.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but again, I don't know if it's an English language barrier thing or just the choice of the screenwriters to do that. I don't know. Because sometimes I feel like with foreign films, I have a hard time keeping track of all the characters.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe that's a little bit of it as well. And I mean, I can't be the only one that has that problem. So obviously,
no,
clearly not. So
no, unfortunately, this movie isn't one of those. Like when I first started watching Hong Kong films, there were a lot of times where I was just like, I don't want to sound racist, but I'm having a real hard time telling who's who, and they all look alike. I know I shouldn't say that, but that's how I feel right now. Luckily with this movie, everybody has such a distinct look, or at least our two main characters have a very distinct look, that we don't have to worry about mixing those guys up. When it comes to the bad guys, I was like, okay, I'm pretty sure this is the same dude from the last scene or 2 scenes ago. So I was able to keep those guys straight. It was just, the names was like, okay, wow, I'm a little overwhelmed here.
Well, and the other thing that doesn't help, and this is something that I've used in the past with foreign films, is being able to look up the full plot somewhere and kind of go back to it to kind of check yourself to make sure, okay, I did understand what was going on, which sounds stupid, but at the same time, it can be helpful with a film like this. And with this film, like you mentioned from the outset, there's not a whole lot anywhere about this movie.
Right.
It seems to be kind of not talked about very much. I found a couple articles online about it, a couple analyses, but nobody's sitting and talking about this as one of the greats of the samurai genre, which is kind of unfortunate because it is a lot of fun.
Right. And I even went and I looked up the Criterion disc, and I was like, well, if there's an audio commentary, maybe that would be great to help unlock this, story and tell me a little bit more. I don't think there was any audio commentary for it.
I don't think so either. Not best I could find. So, and again, it's just stuff like that makes it easier for us as film viewers to kind of decode these foreign films, because we are watching a foreign film and there is going to be something that is lost in the translation. That's just the way it goes. And having kind of those tools to kind of help us along is important. It really is.
I mean, where's Tim Lucas when you need him?
Where is Criterion? Oh, wait, this is a Criterion film, so at least it's a Criterion film.
Do they have audio commentaries on Filmstruck?
For Kill, they don't, but I cannot speak to the rest of the movies.
Okay.
So for Kill, all they have is the trailer.
Okay.
But, I mean, there is a special features button, but I'm not sure it's a special... it might be just like a special features off the DVD, not the commentary track. Which is unfortunate because, like, one of the reasons I own Criterion versions of movies is not only because most of the movies that I own on Criterion are near impossible to find in a good quality elsewhere. It's also because I want to have all the commentary tracks.
Yeah, exactly. And I know there's commentary galore on Sanjuro and Yojimbo and Seven Samurai, so yeah, it's kind of a shame that it's not on this one.
Yeah, it really is, because this film almost like screams needing a commentary. It really does. It really needs it.
Yeah. It would have been nice, or at least even just like a little cheat sheet kind of thing to be like, and this guy is this person, and yeah, but whatever. Well, I do want to mention the score, because the score is also by the same guy who gave us the score for Yojimbo and Sanjuro, Masahiro, I can't remember his last name, Sato. And I really liked the score for this one, as usual. And this one, again, we're quite a few years away from where we were with Yojimbo and Sanjuro. This feels like it's speaking more to the spaghetti western soundtracks that we've already gotten. This feels more Kone. It feels like, because, Yojimbo and Sanjuro were before Fistful of Dollars, and it feels almost like things have kind of circled around, and Sato is almost not making light of, but utilizing some of the Morricone work inside of this work. It feels a little bit more hip, I guess, compared to the other ones, even though those soundtracks are fantastic. There's not necessarily a theme in this like we had in Yojimbo. The music in Yojimbo is super strong. This one, it's more incidental, and it's kind of nice stuff, but the opening I thought was nice with that stranger walking into town.
Well, and the end of the film as well, they really lean into the spaghetti western.
True.
It is really good. It really kind of... it seems a little bit more forward thinking than just a normal samurai film, which is kind of fun that it kind of knows and it is kind of aware of that kind of subgenre or, you know, kind of inverse of the samurai films, the spaghetti western. So it's kind of fun that it like kind of takes that into account.
And also, this is 1968 when this movie comes out, which puts us right into the mix that you and I were talking about a few months ago with all the Japanese New Wave. So this movie is happening while the New Wave movement is just starting out. I think, Death by Hanging was 68. So it's interesting that this is probably, it's not necessarily the end of an era because we're still going to get samurai movies, you know, up until today pretty much. But it's interesting that this is right around the same time that New Wave movement is starting to really pick up traction. And I'm curious, like going forward into the 70s and into the mid 70s, if they pick up some of those tenets of the New Wave movement.
Yeah, I would be curious as well. I mean, I don't know if the other films we watch are much later.
Right.
I mean, one would assume that the genre does come under effect from some of the Japanese New Wave. I mean, I don't know if it has escorts, transgender escorts stabbing themselves in the eyes with needles, but, you know, I'm not sure it goes that far.
This movie made me want to see more of Tatsuya Nakadai's work to the point where I just downloaded The Human Bullet, which was the movie that I believe he made after this one. And like I said, he has been a player. He even makes an appearance on those Criterion discs for Yojimbo and Sanjuro. So he's still looking great and doing a good job. And he even, he's as somebody to watch and somebody who's a real pleasure to watch.
Yeah, I mean, he really holds the film together, and I really like his performance. I mean, you know, he carries the film along with Etsushi Takahashi, but I would say the film probably towards the end really focuses more on Tatsuya Nakadai than anyone else. So, and again, I mean, they're characters that you're meant to root for, and they are the heroes of the film, and like you said, they're really great. Both of them are fantastic.
And I'm looking forward to seeing Harakiri because I think he's our lead character in that as well.
Then I too am looking forward to it, even more so than before, obviously. So, what would you give this film out of 5, Mike?
Out of 5, I'd give this, even though, like I said, I had trouble understanding it the first time around and even the second time, I'd still give it a 4 out of 5. I thought it was a very solid film.
Yeah, I would give it a 4 out of 5 as well. I mean, you know, same issues, kind of hard time following it. And, you know, as someone who watches a lot of movies like yourself, I was really worried going into this podcast that it was going to be you saying you understood the movie and me being like, I was completely confused in parts. So I'm glad in a way that you and I were both on the same page as to like being kind of lost at points with the movie, only because it makes me feel better that it wasn't just me, if that makes sense. So that's a good thing that I consider myself pretty adept at watching movies. So I'm glad that I wasn't the only one who was slightly lost. But
oh, yeah.
Outside of that, I thought this was a really fun, entertaining movie with some really great lead performances. So, but let's take another break and we'll play the preview for the next Culture Cast.
I had a series of visions when I was younger. And after each one ended, the same thought would be stuck in my head.
What did you see?
I saw a nun. Word of my visions reached the church, and I was asked to accompany a priest to an abbey in Romania.
The abbey has a long history.
Valak.
Not all good.
What?
Should lay him down. Callahan's here.
right. On the next Culture Cast, we are going to be talking about the next film in the Conjuring universe. That's what it's called now, the official title. We're going to be talking about The Nun, including an interview with the titular demon nun herself, Miss Bonnie Aarons. It's a fantastic interview. Make sure to check out the next Culture Cast. Until then, however, what have you been up to, Mr. White? What's going on over at the Projection Booth podcast?
Well, you're doing Samurai September. I am doing Czechtember, which is all films from Czechoslovakia and the Czech New Wave. And there's even a special episode that just came out with you on it. So people who are interested in Czech New Wave, which is another genre that you weren't necessarily 100% familiar with going in, but you were a man's man. You took it. You did a man's job, sir.
Yeah, and boy, Dita Saxova is a rough movie to watch, but it's a very good movie, and you should check out that episode of the Projection Booth podcast because it's a really good movie. It's just a really hard movie to watch.
And hey, you know what? It's a short episode. Like people always complain, "Oh, Mike, you're always doing these 4 and 5 hour episodes." Czechtember, hey, it's great. There's not that many people to interview, so you get like hour and a half episodes. So there you go. Right there. If you want a good entree into Czech movies as well as the Projection Booth, there you go. Dita Saxova, Fifth Horseman of Sphere, Happy End, anything that we've covered during our Czechtember specials. And we have a couple more that are in the pipe and coming out very soon, including what was listed as the #1 Czech film of all times, Markéta Lazarova. And we're going to end up things with a Czech comedy, which is Who Would Kill Jesse, which I'm really looking forward to sitting down and talking about that movie. So there's that. And then what else have I been doing? Well, I've been working with you on the Kolchak tapes, of course.
Always. Once a month talking Kolchak. And don't forget Dreams for Sale.
Those Dreams, they're not very expensive because it's a free podcast. So you can get all about Twilight Zone 85, that mid-80s Twilight Zone, which fortunately didn't suffer from wide collars and shoulder pads or any of those things. New wave music. You know, the new wave music, it's driving these girls crazy.
Yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of argy-bargy in Twilight Zone 85.
Whew, thank goodness.
A fan okay, hold on. I'm a fan of Squeeze, so I would have accepted it, but it doesn't need to be in there. If all of a sudden in Dreams for Sale they just started pulling muscles from a shell, I'd probably be upset too. So,
well, I thought you were talking about El DeBarge at first, so I was thinking, here's Who's Johnny, she said, and laughed in her special way.
Oh, dear God. Well, our fucking terrible 80s music references aside, where can people find you on Twitter if they wanna see what you think about things?
Oh, geez, if they want to see all of my anti-Trump rhetoric, they can come to Pro Boothcast. I had a good podcast until I got political.
That's what I've heard, you dirty libtard, you. Get it? We won, libtard. Oh, man. Ugh, the internet truly is a toilet, and all the turds are spinning down together. Good Lord. Well, head on over to culturecast.com where you can find out more about today's episode. You'll find links over to iTunes where you can rate and review the show, and to Patreon where you can kick a couple dollars our way. Donors get access to some unreleased episodes and a chance to guest co-host the CultureCast. If you donate enough, it's up to you, not me. If you want to kick a couple dollars our way, cool. If not, okay, that's your choice. Big thanks as always to Eric and Voka for our intro song, and my good buddy Justin Scott for the outro song, and to Mike for joining me to watch a samurai film that neither one of us had ever seen.
Well, you are welcome, sir. Thank you for having me on the show, and thanks for choosing samurai as being your theme month, even though you had no freaking clue what this was going to include.
It excites me to watch movies that I've never seen before, which I know for some people that might feel like I'm calling them out because they're never on the Culture Cast because of it, and maybe it is.
You know how we do, I'm just two-step, drink in my right hand, phone in my other hand, getting to the money, oh man, two-step, posted with the